and I'm excited to be able to talk to you guys about this. I absolutely cannot see anything in terms of the chat on this slide and in this view since the update. So, Miranda, I will definitely lean on you for any questions or things in the chat. But my name is Abby Horton, and I am a registered nurse and an assistant professor at CCN. I'm a certified health and life coach, a well-being ambassador for the College of Nursing, and one of your wellness class educators. My email is abby.horton at ua.edu, and I'm happy to reach out to you guys via email, answer questions, to receive feedback, or just to connect. So feel free to reach out. My disclaimer is that this webinar is just for educational purposes. It doesn't constitute medical advice. And if you have specific questions, I'll do my best to answer in a general way. But if you have really specific questions, you would need to reach out to your provider. And I want to emphasize that we're just going to try to control what we can control. There is a lot in life that we cannot control. And a lot of times what we can control is the minutia. It's the things that aren't important. And so we're going to give you some really good takeaways for today and hopefully give you some inspiration for how to think about diabetes. I would love for y'all to put in the chat a 1 if you are just here and wanting to learn more about diabetes, and a 2 in the chat if you actually have a diagnosis or you struggle with blood sugar, or you're actively trying to manage something related. You don't have to tell us that you're diagnosed with diabetes, but just 1 is like, yes, I'm actively working on this, and that would be number 2. And then 1 is that I'm just here because I wanted to take a class and I had free time. While we're waiting on those to come in, I just want to focus on, the things that we can control, taking what resonates with you, leaving the rest behind, taking baby steps because small progress is still progress, and then reaching out and connecting if you have any questions. Miranda, are we getting anything in the chat?
Yes, sorry. There are a lot of 1s and a couple 2s.
Okay.
1 borderline.
Okay.
But I'm seeing mostly 1s.
Okay, awesome. Well, then we'll talk about it more from a preventative health stance versus the stance that I would take if you're actually diagnosed or you know that you're having issues with your blood sugar. Thank y'all for doing that. So in the US, 1 in 3 Americans are either considered diabetic or pre-diabetic. So many of you who are 1s may actually not know your status in terms of your blood sugar. Based on our statistics, we can say that pretty confidently. For me, I was pre-diabetic after 1 of my pregnancies and in my early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, and I did not know my blood sugars. When I would check my blood sugar or when I would go to my healthcare provider and get a spot checked blood sugar, those looked great. Or when I would go to Wellbama, those would look fine. But when they would run the 3-month numbers, so what we call the hemoglobin H B1AC, when we would run that number and look at the 90-day range of my blood sugars, that was not okay. And actually, I was in the pre-diabetic stage. And so many people actually don't know that they are pre-diabetic or that they have insulin resistance. So there's about a 242 billion with a B dollars in cost in medical treatments for folks who are either diagnosed or who have pre-diabetes, because many people who have pre-diabetes actually have health issues going on. They just haven't attributed that to their high blood sugar. So we've got some data from 2015 looking at the numbers. Of course, this has worsened since COVID. And we have to, know that diabetes is within the top 10 of the leading causes of death in the U.S. And this number fluctuates a good bit, but it is consistently one of the main reasons why we see a lot of illness, a lot of chronic health conditions, and then certainly death. So these numbers are not important for you to know in terms of you need to know 9.4%. It's just really more of a way for you to gauge how important this issue is. So Alabama has a lot of challenges when it comes to the overall health of the state and to the health of the people within the state. And so we have high premature death rates. We have high prevalence of multiple chronic health conditions. So that would be more than one health condition that's chronic. High prevalence of cigarette smoking. We have a lot of occupational fatalities every year, a lot of mental health issues, a lot of mental health scarcity in terms of providers. We have a high teen birth rate. We have a lot of mental distress. We have diabetes ranked usually pretty high. Usually, Mississippi is the only other state that has poorer numbers than we have in terms of diabetes. And lots of other factors. Of course, we look at like high STI rates among young adults and adolescents, high school graduation rates and things. And so these are just kind of some screenshot numbers of what Alabama is facing in terms of health crises. Um, so it's important to understand how we rank overall. When you look at this map, the impact of diabetes in Alabama, when we look at the dark red states, it means that more than 12% of the prevalence rate of diabetes, we're at 14% in Alabama. 14% of adults in Alabama have diabetes, and it's estimated that 37% of adults in Alabama have prediabetes. And these numbers are pretty old. These are from 2017. And so before I teach this class again, I will need to update and see what looking like post-COVID. I know those numbers relatively easy, but to be able to give you some good data on this, I think it's really helpful to know. Of course, you're seeing mostly southern states in the darker red colors, meaning that they have more prevalence. And we know that for a lot of reasons. We have to drive. We don't have a lot of walking spaces in our rural areas. We know that we eat more fried foods, more fatty foods, more foods that are high in cholesterol. We know that we typically have more sedentary lifestyles now, and that's true across the board, but particularly in the South, and lots of other factors that contribute to that. So diabetes is defined as increased sugar circulating in the blood, and that's also known as hyperglycemia. So if you've ever come to my talks on high blood pressure, anybody can have high blood sugar. Anyone can have high blood pressure, and we do, right? My daughter's 18th birthday was yesterday, and we had cake. Well, I didn't have cake. I didn't eat cake, but everyone in the family had cake. Well, if you had taken their blood sugars after they had cake, they would have had high blood sugar because they had eaten so much sugar with dinner and supper and Halloween. Their blood sugars would be pretty high, unusually so, because they've been consuming a lot of extra sugar in the last week. And we had ice cream on top of that, right? So, hyperglycemia, none of the kids have high blood sugar like on a regular, consistent, sustained basis. So, none of my kids have diabetes, type 1 or type 2, but they probably had hyperglycemia last night. And so that's my example that I also use with blood pressure, right? All of us, when we're driving in traffic and we're stressed out and we're running late, probably have elevated blood pressure or hypertension in that moment, but we don't have the diagnosis of hypertension, right? So I think that's important to note because we're all at risk for developing hyperglycemia that's sustained that can lead to diabetes. We just have to be really diligent about knowing our numbers and monitoring our overall health. So blood glucose can be obtained through a finger stick or venipuncture. You can just, have a quick little monitor that is able to stick your finger, which that's what we do at the Well Bama, or you can actually have a blood draw, which is usually done in the elbow of the arm. We call that the AC. And you can have blood work done in that way. And so we know that when you intake a lot of sugar, it's going to, fluctuate your numbers, even your cholesterol. Like, for example, your cholesterol is likely going to be elevated if you have eggs that morning and then you go have your blood, drawn and you look for your blood cholesterol levels. It's likely going to be elevated. That's when we ask, have you had anything to eat or drink today? What did you have to eat or drink today? When did you have it to eat or drink today? So dietary intake really does matter. And then your HbA1c, when we're looking at the levels obtained, whether it's through the finger or it's through a blood draw, That's looking at the last 90 to 120 days. And that's the gold standard for diagnosing diabetes. And diabetes, hypertension, metabolic syndrome, obesity, all of those things go hand in hand. So for type 2 diabetes, that's typically what we talk about because there aren't great um, kind of preventative measures for type 1 diabetes at this point. Likely there are genetic components and autoimmune conditions and things that factor into developing type 1, which used to be called juvenile diabetes. And we would see the onset of that in childhood, so late childhood to early adulthood, like early 20s. And that would be kind of the absolute range you would see in those folks getting diagnosed with type 1. After that, you would see people getting diagnosed with type 2, even if they didn't have the standard risk factors for a type 2 diabetes diagnosis, because you know, even when I was in nursing school 18 years ago, that was not considered to be something that you developed, like an autoimmune juvenile genetic component of type 1 diabetes. And so that has shifted over the last 5 or 10 years. So obesity, being over 45 years old, a family history, especially immediate family members like grandparents, parents, siblings, history of high blood pressure, history of high cholesterol, history of gestational diabetes. You're much more likely to develop diabetes type 2 after you have had gestational diabetes or you've had insulin resistance during pregnancy. Physically inactive, so you have a sedentary lifestyle, history of heart disease or stroke, history of depression, or history of polycystic ovarian syndrome. So normal blood sugars are going to range, depending on the lab, are going to range anywhere between 70 and just under 100, 99, on your meter. And then the official recommendation for someone with diabetes, if you're fasting, is for your number to be 80 to 130. So you get a little bit of a wider range if you already have diabetes of what your fasting levels should be. So if you come to Wellbema and you get a fasting blood sugar, we would like to see it under 100. We would like to see it over 70 because less than 70, you might be having low blood sugar. You can have hyper reactive responses to hypoglycemia. So there's lots of things there. If you think about blood sugar on a spectrum or on a continuum, even having hypoglycemia where your blood sugar is too low can actually be an indicator that you may develop hyperglycemia or diabetes later in life. And so if you're 2 hours after your meal, a normal blood sugar or a typical blood sugar would be less than 140. And then 2 hours after a meal, if you have diabetes, we would like to see it less than 180. Those are the kind of the standards for what we would like to see your blood sugar. Most people don't know their blood sugar numbers and ranges unless they're actually diabetic and they're tracking it. Now, I periodically, especially if I'm in a weight loss mode or if I'm doing new workouts, I will wear a continuous glucose monitor, or I will borrow my husband who has type 2 diabetes. I will borrow his meter, and we have extra supplies that we buy on Amazon, and I will use his meter. I actually have my own now because I check it so frequently, but I actually do spot check my blood sugar to see, is this a blood sugar issue? For me personally, I have a watch that I wear that tracks a lot of my vital signs. And so think like blood pressure, heart rate, O2 sat, all of those good things. And a lot of times when I feel like my blood sugar is low, my heart rate is actually low. So that was a really interesting thing to me, is because I would feel like my blood sugar was dropping and I would feel a little hangry. And then I would check my blood sugar, and my blood sugar would actually be good. It would be okay. It would be within the normal limits of what I would expect. But then I wasn't checking other things like my O2 sat or my blood pressure or my heart rate. And what I noticed by wearing a watch that would tell me those things without me having to check is that a lot of times when I felt like I was having low blood sugar, my heart rate was actually low. So for me, my heart rate when I feel my best is between probably like 82 to 84 beats per minute. That is oddly specific. I would not expect anyone else to know that. But when I get down into like 72, 74, if it jumps really, significantly, those 10 points, that's pretty significant for someone like me who has dysautonomia POTS. For me, mine can change just by standing up that much. My heart rate can jump and it can lower pretty fast too. So what I noticed is that I would feel the same kind of effects when it was really my heart, not my blood sugar. And so knowing those kinds of things can be really helpful to you in figuring out if I'm not feeling well, what may be going on. I also have worn that watch when I've taken baths at night, and I like to take a long bath. I like hot water. And what I realized is that, you should feel relaxed when you get out of a bathtub. But because of my POTS dysautonomia, when I'm in the bathtub, I wore the watch just by accident one night. It's waterproof, so I didn't take it off. And what I noticed is that my heart rate was sustained at like closer to 100 beats per minute. And that's very different from my baseline of 70 to 80 beats per minute. So what I noticed after getting out of the bathtub, probably because of the length I stayed, probably because of the hot water, that I was actually getting out of the bathtub. Instead of feeling relaxed and rejuvenated, I was feeling worse. And it was because my heart rate was staying up high for me, right? Just over 100, that is no big deal to most people, but for me, it was the increase in the range. So knowing these numbers, the reason we say know your numbers is because you might be falling in a typical range, but it might not be the best ideal range for you. And so having the ability to recognize that pattern will help you in deciding, do I need to eat that sugary donut, or am I actually going to feel worse when I do X, Y, or Z? For me, my example with blood sugar is that I always, anticipated that when I would drink my coffee with sugar, that I would feel worse, that my blood sugar would be impacted, and it wasn't. So I wore the continuous glucose monitor, and I tracked because I do like sugary drinks. That's kind of my Achilles heel is that when I would drink a Coke from Chick-fil-A, which is my favorite Coke, I did not really see a change in my blood sugar. But when I would drink a drink from Starbucks, like a refresher, I would notice it's the same sugar content, which is what's wild. The sugar content in terms of grams was the same, really, really high. But my blood sugar would act very differently and be very unstable drinking something from Starbucks versus drinking something from like a Coke machine or a Chick-fil-A Coke. And so again, that's another example of sometimes what we expect to be causing the blood sugar issues, my coffee with sugar without eating anything in the morning. That's what I expected it to kind of spike my sugar versus, it's the same grams of sugar, Starbucks versus the Coke, but my blood sugar bottomed out and crashed on the Starbucks, but didn't on the Coke. And so there's probably lots of reasons for that, but it means that you can't just look at the grams of sugar and not kind of think about, okay, what's causing that. One thing that would be really easy to point to is that oftentimes when I'm drinking a Coke from Chick-fil-A, I'm also eating food, but I'm not eating food when I'm drinking the Starbucks drink. That doesn't account for it every time for me, but eating something with sugar, especially liquid sugar, is always going to be a helpful thing to try to stabilize your blood sugars. So that's good for anybody to do. Anything I'm telling you is good for you, whether you have diabetes or not. So the HbA1c for a person without diabetes, we like to see it be less than 5.7. And for someone with diabetes, we like for it to be 7.0 or less. And if you've ever seen those, you can see like 11s and higher on these percentage numbers. So they can get pretty high. And those are close together. So 5.7 versus 7, there's a real small margin there in terms of the numbers that we're expecting to see. So 87 million Americans are diagnosed with prediabetes each year. So many of those folks do not actually start any kind of treatment plan or preventative plan. If you just have elevated blood sugar or blood glucose, that's not enough to be diagnosed with type 2. You usually do have to have that longer test over the 90 to 120 day period to get a diagnosis. You usually have to have that or a couple of maybe 2 or 3 instances where your blood sugar is sustained and high and you're having symptoms. You can develop long-term damage to your health and to your body if you have prediabetes and you're having sustained high blood sugar, because it can impact your vessels, your blood viscosity, how thick it is. It can impact your inflammation and just cause a lot of other issues related to chronic health that aren't related necessarily just to your endocrine system. So healthy lifestyle habits are really what we want to see us all do, right? No matter what your stage of diabetes. Diabetes is one of those things that we have often said, oh, well, once you get it, you can't reverse it. And that's just not true. You can reverse a lot of the signs and symptoms of diabetes. You may not get, a complete cure and removal of that diagnosis, but you can undo a lot of the, damage that you may have experienced from high blood sugars and inflammation if you especially catch it early and if you're very proactive with it. My husband has seen a lot of improvements. He was diagnosed with diabetes the February before our new 18-year-old was actually born. So I was expecting her, and the same month I found out that I was pregnant with Reese, he found out that he had diabetes. And so 18 years later, he is still able to make a lot of changes with his health that impact his blood sugar, that impact his level of insulin, and that sort of thing. And so my message to you with that is to not give up hope, because early on, he really did not think that his messaging was that, oh, well, I have it, I can't do anything about it. I'm just going to take my medicine and live my life. And the conversation that he and I are having now is that he really wished that he had been told early on that he could change the outcome, that he could make it better, that he might even be able to reverse the diagnosis because it was caught so early on. He wished that he had had that conversation, that someone had said that to him early in the diagnosis phase, because where he just kind of accepted it, took the medication and moved on, he didn't really work on doing a lot of the lifestyle recommendations that I'm going to share with you. And he now looks back and realizes that he probably could have changed a lot of his health if he had done those things, 18 years ago. And so I hope that you benefit from that conversation that he and I recently had. I'm a talker. He is not a talker. He doesn't share things like that. But he didn't mind me sharing that with you guys today because he hopes that it will help someone else. And he wished that he had been more proactive. I begged him to be more proactive, but I'm just one voice, and I think it's important that we hear that from a lot of other people too, and we change the narrative around a lot of the chronic conditions that we see today. So type 1 diabetes is what we consider insulin-dependent diabetes, and it's often known as juvenile diabetes, although, I've just mentioned we're shifting that language. Type 2 is usually non-insulin dependent. It's usually an adult onset, although we're seeing more and more obesity in childhood, and so we're seeing, kids who have a type 2 diagnosis in childhood because of obesity. And advanced diabetes can lead to insulin dependence like it did for my husband. So that's not uncommon at all. So type 1 versus type 2. Type 1 is that the person does not produce enough insulin, and that insulin is needed to transport sugar from the blood into the cells to be used for energy. And so as a result, sugar levels will rise in the blood. Type 2 is that the person does produce insulin, but it may not be enough, or it may be that there's insulin resistance in the cells to the insulin, that it's very resistant because of so much sugar. So the cell walls become resistant, and that they're not able to actually absorb and use the blood sugar. So the sugar stays in the blood instead of going into the cell for energy. So gestational diabetes is another type. This type of diabetes develops during pregnancy or gestation, and typically this will resolve after pregnancy, but there are a number of people that afterwards they become high risk for cardiovascular issues, metabolic disease, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and anyone that gives birth to a baby more than 9 pounds should be evaluated as soon as that is acknowledged for gestational diabetes, and should be monitored after the pregnancy to see, does this progress into traditional diabetes. So metabolic syndrome, we've mentioned it a couple of times. These are risk factors that are things like being overweight, being obese, your age, so the older that you are, your ethnicity or heredity or DNA, your diabetes, so if you have diabetes, and then if you have other things like fatty liver disease, PCOS, or sleep apnea, all put you at a risk for developing metabolic syndrome, which is a cluster of conditions that occur together. Usually, it's your increased risk for cardiovascular disease like heart disease and stroke, type 2 diabetes, and typically your blood pressure is going to be high, your blood sugar is going to be high, you're going to have extra adipose or fat tissue around the body, especially in the core and your organs, and then you're probably going to have abnormal cholesterol levels or high triglyceride levels, along with these other diseases listed on number 5. That is very, very common. So what happens is a lot of times people will say, and it's kind of ironic, they'll say, "Oh, I see that you're a little overweight, and I see that your blood pressure is high today." And then they'll say, "Let's see if your blood work is back." And they're like, "Oh, what a coincidence. Your cholesterol is also high." And the thing is that cholesterol, we say that high blood pressure is often a silent killer. That is the kind of tagline. It sounds terrible, but that's the tagline of high blood pressure because people are like, "Oh, I didn't know I had high blood pressure. There were no symptoms." Well, there are symptoms of high blood pressure. Eye pain and pressure, increasing headaches, feeling fatigued, feeling foggy headed, being drained, feeling weak. Those are all indicators of high blood pressure. It's just that they're so vague and they feel very much like being 39 and stressed that we don't know that it's high blood pressure. But the thing is that high cholesterol truly has no signs or symptoms. So it really is the silent killer. And typically, your high cholesterol, you can have lots of reasons why your blood pressure is high. But typically, your blood pressure is high because you have a narrowing of your arteries and vessels from the cholesterol that's high that gets deposited in those vessels. So we have a talk on all things heart, all things cardiovascular. And if this interests you, I would really recommend you go watch that video on our wellness.ua.edu channel, on our website, or on our YouTube channel, because it goes into more details about this relationship. But I think it's so important because if you're not sure what all you're, kind of trying to manage, then it's going to be really difficult. You're always going to be chasing a symptom if you're not clear on what's causing the issue. And typically, it's that you're having an inflammatory response to something. And sometimes it's just sugar, but a lot of times it's other things. And until you stop that inflammatory cascade, then you're going to continue having lots of issues. So, metabolic syndrome is this visceral, so meaning the adipose or fat tissue around the organs, the vital organs in the center of your body. Insulin resistance, meaning your cells can't absorb or do anything with the insulin that you have. You have too much, and also they're not getting that to be able to use for energy. That's why you feel so tired. Hypertension, so you've got sustained high blood pressures, high triglycerides, so those are high stored fats in the blood, and then low HDL, which the talk I just referenced will go more into the triglycerides and cholesterol aspect, but the HDL is what we call the helper, and it's like Pac-Man. It goes in from the liver and it gobbles up the extra cholesterol that your body isn't using. And cholesterol is kind of like a patch or a band-aid within the body. It goes to the places where it needs to repair or restore vessels. And so when that cholesterol doesn't get used up, if you've got too much that's being made by the body, which is usually the case, and then on top of that, you're eating too much cholesterol. Eggs are not bad, but sometimes you have to be mindful of your consumption of all types of cholesterol. Then that HDL, if that is low, you have not enough HDL Pac-Man helpers to gobble it up and take it back to the liver to be recycled, then what happens is that cholesterol doesn't have anywhere to go. It's also circulating in the blood with too much sugar. And so what happens, you've got cholesterol with like basically, blood sugar gum sticking to your arteries, sticking to your vessels. And then when that builds up, it becomes what we call a plaque. And when that plaque ruptures, like a bump on your face might rupture, a zit might rupture, then that's where you have an event, a heart event if it's near the heart, or a brain event if it's near the brain. And that's when you can have things like vasospasms, TIAs, which are mini strokes, heart attacks, and those kinds of things. So it doesn't sound great. We're going to get to some helpful, happier things, but that's what's really important for you to know. So getting at least 30 minutes of activity a day, walking, I'm so glad that, Wellbeing is promoting this. Walking after meal times for 10 minutes can dramatically improve the amount of your body being able to actually use the insulin. So if you eat lunch and then take a 10-minute walk, that is amazing. If you eat dinner and take a 10-minute walk, that is amazing. If you can only do it one time a day, do it at your heaviest meal. And I would say, even if supper is not your heaviest meal, I would recommend doing it at night, especially now that it's getting so dark. Be safe about it, but walk after that meal and try to make your biggest meal either breakfast or lunch, not supper. So when I would do reverse fasting, what I would actually do is I would eat my biggest meal at breakfast, my medium-sized meal at lunch, and my light meal, so like a very small salad with protein or a shake or something like that, at dinner, because you want to be eating when it's light outside. That goes with our body's natural rhythm. Think of prehistoric days. Our prehistoric ancestors, our cave people, were not eating at midnight. They were not eating in the dark around the campfire. They were eating during the day, during the daylight, and that's their natural circadian rhythm. So eat plenty of fruits and vegetables, lean proteins, and whole grains. Healthy fats are also really good. You're not going to see me eating margarine. You're going to see me eating butter, but butter and margarine in moderation. Limit saturated fats. So look at your actual, you know, packaging on the different things that you're buying at the grocery store. If it has saturated fat, try to avoid that. If it has trans fat, try to avoid that. A lot of times we don't look at the label, and if we do look at the label, women particularly are conditioned to just look at the calories and maybe the serving size, but we really need to be looking at the fats. We need to be looking at the cholesterol, the trans fat. We need to be looking at the vitamins and minerals, those kind of things. I talk about how to read a food label in that other class I mentioned. And then, of course, we know to maintain a healthy weight, much easier said than done. And then not smoking, vaping, or using any of those kind of like recreational or nicotine substances, because that is going to, significantly increase your risk factors. Because nicotine can, along with the other things, so not just nicotine, but those products can restrict your blood flow. And of course, there's a lot of chemicals and things that are in those products that will actually, indicate poor outcomes, blood restriction, poor wound healing, that sort of thing. So, early symptoms, we call them the three P's. So, polydipsia, polyphagia, polyuria. So, increased thirst, you're thirsty all the time. Increased hunger, you're hungry all the time. And frequent urination, you're always going to the bathroom. Also, having UTIs, especially for men, that's a really big red flag, because men typically do not have UTIs unless they have an underlying condition, unlike women that have more of like logistical anatomical issues with that. Dry mouth, unexplained weight loss, unexplained weight gain, really, too. Fatigue, blurred vision. You see a lot of weight loss with type 1 diabetes and weight gain with type 2. Fatigue, blurred vision, headaches, and so much more. So these are the major complications. I've mentioned them. So having a good, eye doctor, an ophthalmologist, having someone that's keeping a check on your kidney health, your heart health, your brain health, and making sure that you're being checked with your feet. Lots of care that goes into it. A good primary health provider or nurse practitioner can keep an eye on these things and then send you out to specialists as needed. And I really do think that that's key, because you need a team, right? You need a team taking care of you. Over time, circulation can be diminished to the feet and to the eyes, and so that's why you have extra concerns about that. High blood pressure, that's usually associated with high blood sugar, causes a lot of the kidney issues and a lot of the peripheral, you know, just pain and neuropathy that you can see, and then all of the other things we mentioned. Neurological system, of course, is impacted because of sustained damage due to the inflammation and the high sugars, which can cause nerve pain or neuropathy. And then we've got a lot of peripheral neuropathy symptoms like pain, burning, tingling, numbness of the hands and the feet, decreased sensations, that sort of thing. And then the immune system, of course, is weakened, after we eat a lot of sugar on Halloween. And then, we're going into the colder months and we're inside more, less vitamin D, less sunshine. A lot of times our immune system is weakened by that sugar and all of those other factors. So, really watching your sugars during the colder months is very important. And you can get increased risk for infections. I've listed a few here, but any infection, you're going to have an increased risk for that. So, the sweet truth is that you can improve your overall health and manage diabetes or prevent diabetes or reverse diabetes in some cases. And so, it's important to understand how. And working with a provider like a registered dietitian nutritionist, we've got the Nourish app that our benefits pay for. We've got, RDNs here on campus that you can set up an appointment with a $20 copay. We have tons of resources at reduced cost. So take advantage of that. Come to our well-being screenings. It really is all about lifestyle changes. It's not glamorous. It's not, all of the fun things that we want to be doing for our health. It's the basics, right? It's drinking more water. It's getting more sleep. It's taking breaks. It's resting. It's eating good foods that we know that are good for us. It's staying out of the drive-through. My hand is raised. Stay out of Chick-fil-A and Starbucks and Heritage House. Stay out of the drive-throughs while you're building good lifestyle habits. It's not that you can't ever have those things. It's that it can't be the bulk of what you're doing in terms of nutrition. And it's moving your body. So not just exercising an hour a day, but it's moving your body throughout the day. So not coming in, sitting down, sitting, maybe going to the restroom a couple of times, going to eat your lunch, coming back and sitting, and then driving home and sitting some more. Even if you're doing an intense workout for 1 hour a day, that's not going to override the other 23 hours that you're likely sitting or lying down or sleeping. So 1 hour is not enough movement throughout the day. So, nourishing your body well, being active, getting plenty of sleep and rest, taking the stairs, parking in the back of the lot, taking any medications that you need to support you, any supplements that you need to support you, taking good care of your body. What does your body need? I woke up today after, probably a whirlwind of the last 2 weeks. I was leading a conference out of town last week. We had the birthday party, we had Halloween, we have lots of other things coming up on the Horton family calendar. And of course, my work schedule. And so I woke up this morning and I was like, okay, I need to pick two things that I'm going to take all of my responsibilities list for 2026. So that was taking good care of my body and my brain, right? I'm not someone that ever thinks about what can I take off of my plate. I don't like subtraction. I'm always like, yes, let me add something else, right? And so I identified two things this morning. And so I reached out to those two people and I said, hey, I'm not going to be able to do this, blah, 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 for 2026, but I can do this and I can help with recruitment of this. And then the other email that I sent this morning at like 6:30, I said, okay, let me reach out and see when does my term for this obligation, this commitment run out? And let me get, feedback on that and see, okay, when will that roll off my plate? Because maybe that can't roll off in the spring, but maybe it'll roll off in May. And so I'm still waiting to hear back from that. I would encourage you to look at your schedule and see what you can do for that today. If you know me in real life, you know how radical and also psychologically painful that was for me. But I woke up today realizing, okay, I'm tired and I'm cold and I don't feel amazing. And I'm probably not going to find extra time to do X, Y, and Z if I don't do these things over here. And that can make a huge difference in how your body responds, how it heals, how it rests. And so I would encourage that for you today. It's taken me years, literally, to get to that point. Avoid the use of tobacco products and nicotine where you can. Keep routine medical appointments. Monitor your blood sugar, your blood pressure, your heart rate, your O2 sat, anything that you can monitor. I'm a big fan of wearable technology. And then manage your stress. Much easier said than done. Also, I will say about the tobacco products and your stress, You also don't want secondhand smoke and you don't want secondhand stress. So if you're getting secondhand smoke or secondhand stress from others, note where that's happening, when that's happening, and how can you start to prevent against that. Other changes are things like yoga, Pilates, um, hydration, like I mentioned, eating well. It really is the 5 wellness basics. We also have a class on that. But there's tons that you can do. One of my favorite things that I just found this week, I was having a lot of pain earlier in the week, and many of you may know I do have chronic pain from a couple of health conditions that I have. Monday night, I was really having a lot of pain to the point that I packed a bag and thought that I may have to go to the emergency room. And so I was like, okay, I don't want to do that. You know, Reese's birthday is tomorrow. I have a lot of work on my plate this week. What can I do instead? And so I took a shower. I did some deep breathing. I found EMDR binaural beats on Spotify. So EMDR is a therapy that can be done with visual cues, but it's very hard to do by yourself without a practitioner. So, but by putting in earbuds, I found this playlist on Spotify that mimics the eyes changing like you do in therapy with EMDR. And I felt like that there may be like a component, like a psychological component, because I was feeling pretty stressed. And so I thought, well, let's see what else is out there, because I don't want to go to the emergency room. I was having a lot of kidney pain. And so I said, okay, let's try this. So 45 minutes after taking a shower, taking my medication that I take that usually does not relieve the pain fully. And after doing some deep breathing and meditation and listening to the binaural, beats where they were swapping ears back and forth, I'd hear it in the left and then I'd hear it in the right and then I'd hear it in both. After 45 minutes, I felt dramatically different. I was able to go to bed like I typically would, and I didn't have any more pain the rest of the week. And so, it's just the reason I'm sharing that is because there's always something more that you can do. And a lot of our pain response is not only physiological, but it's also, psychological. There's a brain component to it. And it doesn't mean that the pain started in your brain, but it means that if you can get control of your breath, of your meditation, of your thoughts, and you can kind of reset your nervous system. A lot of times, your nervous system then is going to override the actual physical pain that you feel. And I have done that time and time again since I was 12 years old and have been dealing with chronic, diffuse general pain. So I hope that that helps somebody on the call today. There are some other tips here. Again, really just a summary of what I've shared. I think it's the most important that you have a community of like-minded people. It's much easier when the people in your house and in your circle are doing the things that you're doing. We're like the 5 people we hang out with. That's an old Jim Rohn quote. I finally tracked down who said it. It was Jim Rohn, the original guru of personal development and mentor to Tony Robbins. Y'all probably know Tony Robbins. You probably don't know Jim Rohn. But he said that your 5 friends that you hang out with is who you're most like. And so if your friends are on board and doing similar things, that's very helpful. So get your group of friends and come to Wellbeing and go and do these wellness tips. Go watch those extra videos and see where you might make some changes. The 5 to Thrive, these are the wellness basics that I mentioned. And again, we have that talk that you can go watch on YouTube. And it's so simple. It's not easy, but it's so simple. What helps us with our health, even if we feel like things are too far gone. Here's some other things that you can look at. Lean protein plus a full fiber carb. That's something like oatmeal plus a healthy fat at every meal. So when I'm doing a lot of training, I will do oatmeal, like a cup of oatmeal, a half a cup of oatmeal, some avocado, some turkey, and then a piece of toast. And that works out to be a pretty healthy, sustainable meal for me. But making sure that you're choosing a balanced plate, that you're getting in all of your macros. So a healthy carb, a healthy fat, and a protein at every meal is really helpful to maintaining your blood sugar. A lot of times, if you're feeling stressed, it's because your blood sugar is spiking on a roller coaster all day. And so just know that that may be not just anxiety because you're stressed. It may be because your blood sugar is erratic and it's trying to get your attention. That's really, really helpful. Stabilize your blood sugar. You might feel less stressed during the day. Eat for health, eat a balanced meal, eat the rainbow, meaning that you're eating lots of colorful foods. A lot of times we just eat beige or brown food, and we might eat some green if we're feeling like we want to be healthy. But every nutrient color group that we leave out is an antioxidant, is a nutrient, is a mineral, is a vitamin that we're not getting in our diet. Nature color coded it for us, so make sure that you're getting a variety. And then, track your meals and your snacks. If you don't like writing it down, just take a picture of it. So take a picture of everything you eat and drink, put it in an album on your phone. It doesn't have to go into a fancy app. It doesn't have to be something you track by hand. But, eating a hamburger, that looks very different if you're going to get a fast food hamburger versus if you're going to get a gourmet burger at, a fancy restaurant in Birmingham. So all hamburgers aren't created equal. So same thing with, are you getting, duck fried, fatty fries? And that's probably pretty healthy if you're not eating too many of them. Or are you getting the ones that are deep fried at the local fast food restaurant? So knowing the quality of your food and ingredients is as important as knowing the calories. So just writing that you had a hamburger and fries, a lot of times we need more detail, like what kind of hamburger, what kind of fries, and taking pictures and looking at portion sizes, I think is even more helpful than just trying to track it down old school style. So make one healthy change at a time. The more you try to change, the more you need to change, the less capacity you have for change. So just pick one thing. And then, use this as a reference for your protein, for your complex carbs. This is like a little cheat sheet menu for you guys. Non-starchy vegetables, healthy fats, diet and exercise recommendations. So we say 30 to 100, well, really 150 minutes a week, which is about 30 minutes a day is the recommendation. But 30 minutes to an hour a day is pretty good with one active rest day, so Saturday or Sunday. And then medication, of course, there's lots of things here that you would talk to your provider if you are diagnosed. And then stress management, doing check-ins, scheduling times to stress, unplugging, disconnecting, resting, seeking support, breaking up with our cell phones. I just bought a book yesterday on how to break up with your cell phone and social media, so I'll be checking that out and sharing insights with you guys. And then just doing things like meditations and deep breathing and walks. Those are all positive coping strategies. Monitoring your blood sugar, so that you'll have a recommendation for how often to check your blood sugar. It's up to 6 times a day for people who have diabetes. But you'll get specialized recommendations from your provider if you have the diagnosis. And then how often you should be tracking these numbers if you do have type 1 or type 2. And this is a book called Master Your Diabetes, which has a more holistic, comprehensive, integrative approach. Again, I wouldn't recommend everything that's suggested in this book, but I do think it gives you a more comprehensive overview of a non-medical version of how to approach diabetes. And so it's always a good read. And just know that I wouldn't follow this to a T, but it's a great conversation starter with your provider who's managing your diabetes if you have it. And it's a great read for people who don't have it. So, but definitely take a common sense approach to anything that they share. And then we would love for you to follow us on our social media. And I'm happy to take questions. Okay. I do have class at 1. So if y'all